Clara Reynolds crossed the airport terminal, phone pressed to her ear, half listening to her sister Lila's routine pilot chatter. She mentally reviewed the morning's forensic accounting cases while Lila described her Paris-bound passengers. The usual business types. Wait. Lila's voice sharpened. Clara, isn't Ethan supposed to be at that medical conference in Boston? Clara stopped mid-stride. Yes, he left yesterday. Why? Because he just walked past me into business class with a blonde woman. They're both heading to Paris. A chill spread through Clara's chest. That's impossible. I spoke to him from his hotel room this morning. Clara, I'm looking right at him. Designer briefcase, that watch you gave him for your anniversary. Clara's training as a forensic accountant kicked in, categorizing facts, searching for explanation. But one truth remained. Her husband couldn't simultaneously be in Boston and boarding a plane to Paris. Send me a photo, she said, her voice suddenly steady. Now. Clara Reynolds traced her finger along the spreadsheet, following the money trail with practiced precision. After 15 years as a forensic accountant, she could spot financial deception like most people noticed spelling errors. Look at this, she said, gesturing to her colleague Marcus. Every quarter, they're routing funds through this shell company in the Caymans before it hits the books. Marcus leaned in, adjusting his glasses. Clever, most people would miss that pattern. That's why they hire us, Clara replied, highlighting the sequence. Once you see it, it's almost disappointingly predictable. These fraud schemes all follow patterns. People think they're being original, but there's always a signature. She completed her analysis with methodical precision, compiling the evidence into a report for their client. Clara found a quiet satisfaction in bringing order to chaos, exposing hidden truths beneath manipulated numbers. In her world, everything eventually balanced. At 5:30, she shut down her computer and gathered her things. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Dinner meeting canceled. Home by 7. Miss you. Clara smiled, feeling the familiar warmth that came with their easy, predictable life together. 12 years of marriage had settled into comfortable rhythms. His surgical practice, her accounting firm, their renovated Victorian in the suburbs, everything in its place, every column adding up perfectly. Another financial criminal exposed? Marcus asked as she headed out. Just following the numbers, Clara replied. They always tell the truth if you know how to listen. Clara stirred the pasta sauce while Ethan packed his suitcase, his movements quick and efficient after years of medical conferences. She noted the growing frequency of these trips, the third this quarter. Boston in March, she said. Isn't that a bit cold? Conference centers all feel the same, Ethan replied, folding a dress shirt with practiced precision. Besides, I'll be indoors most of the time, listening to presentations on cardiac surgical techniques. Clara nodded, but something in his tone caught her attention, a slight pitch change she'd noticed before. The forensic accountant in her noted it, filed it away. 3 days, right? She asked, checking the calendar where she'd marked his trips in blue ink. The blocks of blue had been multiplying lately. 3 days. He zipped the suitcase. The keynote is tomorrow, then panel discussions. I'll probably skip the final reception on Friday. Clara brought their plates to the table. Will Dr. Grayson be there? You mentioned he had that new approach to valve repair. A barely perceptible pause. I think so. The whole cardiac team from Mass General should be attending. They ate dinner, discussing their schedules with the efficient coordination of two professionals accustomed to managing complex lives. When his phone chimed, Ethan glanced at it, then slipped it back into his pocket without responding. Important? Clara asked. Just the conference app with schedule updates, he said, reaching for his wine. Nothing that can't wait until morning. Clara's phone rang as she navigated afternoon traffic, Lila's name lighting up the screen. Her younger sister rarely called during flights. Their conversations usually bookended Lila's international schedule as a senior pilot. "Hey, stranger," Clara answered, switching to hands-free. "Aren't you supposed to be over the Atlantic right now?" "Pre-flight delay," Lila replied. "We're still at the gate. Listen, Clara." Her voice held an unusual hesitation. "What's wrong?" "Probably nothing, but I just saw Ethan boarding first class. Here. In my plane. To Paris." Clara's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "That's impossible. He left for Boston yesterday. Medical conference. I spoke to him this morning from his hotel room." "Clara, I'm looking right at him," Lila insisted. "Navy suit? That silver watch you gave him for your anniversary. He's with a woman, blonde, designer everything. They're settling into 2A and 2B right now." Traffic blurred as Clara's mind rapidly sorted facts, seeking logical explanations, mistaken identity, a look-alike. But Lila knew Ethan well. Family dinners, holidays, their wedding. "Are you absolutely certain?" Clara's voice remained level, her training in crisis analysis activating automatically. 100%, Lila confirmed. "I can see him from where I'm standing." "Clara, what's going on? Should I say something to him?" "No." The word came out sharper than intended. Clara took a careful breath. "No, don't approach him. Can you send me a photo?" "Discreetly?" "Hold on." The line went quiet for a moment. "Sending now." Clara pulled into a parking lot, waiting for the image to load. When it appeared, the careful structure of her world began to fracture. There was no mistaking her husband's profile, his distinctive posture, the watch she'd saved for months to buy him. "I have to go," Clara said, her mind already calculating next steps. "Your flight leaves in 30 minutes, right?" "Yes, but—" "Go. Fly the plane. I'll handle this." Clara ended the call and sat motionless for exactly 60 seconds, allowing herself this single minute of stunned disbelief before the investigator in her took control. Then she started the car and headed home, where Ethan would supposedly be calling her from Boston tonight. Irony established between Clara's professional skill at detecting fraud and personal blind spot, Clara pulled into her driveway at 7:30, her pulse steady despite the impossibility awaiting her inside. The familiar colonial home, with its warm lights, felt suddenly foreign, like a stage set. She entered through the side door, setting down her briefcase with deliberate calm. The sound of cabinet doors closing in the kitchen guided her forward. "Ethan?" she called, keeping her voice neutral. "In here," came the familiar reply. "Just making some tea. Want some?" Clara stepped into the kitchen doorway, studying the man who looked exactly like her husband. Same height, same build, same dark hair with distinguished silver at the temples. But now, armed with Lila's photo and certainty, she saw the subtle differences, the stance slightly off, the way he held the mug not quite right. "How was your presentation today?" she asked, watching him carefully. He turned, smiling Ethan's smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Went well. Dr. Haskins asked some pointed questions about my methodology, but the audience seemed receptive." Clara noted the details, knowing there was no Dr. Haskins at Mass General's cardiac unit. She checked. "Must be exhausting, all those lectures," she said, moving to the refrigerator. "When's your flight back tomorrow?" "Last session ends at 4. Should be home by 8. He sipped his tea, leaning against the counter in almost but not quite Ethan's casual posture. "How was your day?" "Interesting," Clara replied, meeting his gaze directly. "A case took an unexpected turn. Something flickered in his eyes, a momentary calculation, quickly masked. "Anything you can talk about?" "Not yet," she said, still gathering evidence. At midnight, with the imposter asleep upstairs, Clara sat in her home office, the glow of her laptop illuminating her face. She'd disabled the automatic backup to their shared cloud storage first. Whatever she discovered tonight wouldn't be synchronized. She began with their joint accounts, meticulously tracking patterns over the past 18 months. Within an hour, she identified a troubling trend. Small transfers, never enough to trigger alerts, moved systematically from their main account to an investment portfolio she'd never authorized. From there, funds disappeared into offshore accounts through a complex series of transactions designed to evade detection. Clara logged into Ethan's email using the password he thought she didn't know. Most messages matched their discussions, but she discovered a separate email account linked to his recovery phone number. She couldn't access it directly, but its existence confirmed her suspicions. Next came credit card statements. Multiple hotel charges in cities where Ethan had supposedly attended conferences, except the dates didn't align with actual medical events. Flights to Paris booked months in advance while he told her about Boston trips planned only weeks ago. The methodical betrayal struck her with clinical precision. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated, sustained deception requiring planning and resources. Clara opened a secure browser and began searching for professional impersonation services. She found nothing conclusive but understood what she was dealing with. Not just infidelity, but an elaborate scheme involving significant financial fraud and possibly a professional imposter. She closed the laptop, her mind crystallizing around a single truth. Whatever game Ethan was playing, he'd chosen the wrong opponent. Clara followed the imposter the next morning, maintaining a careful distance in a rental car he wouldn't recognize. When he left their neighborhood, he didn't head toward the hospital as expected, but drove to a coffee shop downtown. She parked across the street, watching through her camera's telephoto lens. The man who'd slept in her house sat at an outdoor table, checking his watch repeatedly. After 10 minutes, another man approached, older, expensively dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Clara focused her camera, taking a series of rapid photographs as they spoke. The conversation appeared tense, the older man gesturing emphatically while Ethan nodded, accepting what appeared to be instructions. When the older man departed, Clara circled the block, then entered the coffee shop, selecting a table behind the imposter. She ordered a coffee she didn't intend to drink and angled her phone to record their conversation. "Need another week minimum," the fake Ethan was saying into his phone. "She's not suspicious yet, but I can't access her work files without raising flags." A pause as he listened. "I understand the timeline, but pushing too hard could blow everything." Another pause. "Look, Daniel Reed doesn't fail assignments. I've maintained this cover perfectly. Tell Ethan I need that additional payment as agreed." Clara's breath caught, but her hands remained steady on her phone, recording every word. "Fine. I'll meet you Wednesday with whatever I can get." He ended the call, gathering his things. Clara remained motionless until he was gone, then reviewed the recording and photographs. Daniel Reed. A name, confirmation of payment, and evidence of an assignment involving her work files. She had enough to begin dismantling whatever scheme Ethan had constructed, starting with the actor he'd hired to impersonate him in his own home. Clara measured coffee grounds with practiced precision, while Daniel shuffled into the kitchen, his hair slightly disheveled in what she now recognized as a calculated imitation of Ethan's morning appearance. "You're up early," he observed, reaching for a mug. "Big case review today," Clara replied, her tone casual as she poured water into the coffee maker. "The Morrison audit has some irregularities I need to address before the client meeting." She watched him from her peripheral vision, noting how he mimicked Ethan's morning stretching routine with near-perfect accuracy. The dedication to detail was both impressive and chilling. "Speaking of irregularities," Clara continued, "I noticed some account notifications on my phone. Did you transfer money from our savings recently?" The question was carefully calibrated, specific enough to test his knowledge, vague enough to conceal her awareness. Daniel barely hesitated. "Just the quarterly adjustment to the investment portfolio. Same as always." Clara nodded, filing away the lie. "Right. I've been distracted with work." She placed a bowl of fruit on the table, positioning her phone face down beside it. The device was recording every word. "Will you be home for dinner?" she asked, sliding into the familiar rhythm of domestic conversation. "Should be," Daniel replied. "Unless Dr. Reynolds needs additional consult time." "Text me if you'll be late," Clara said, allowing just enough warmth in her smile to maintain the illusion of normalcy. When he left, Clara remained in the kitchen, watching through the window as his car disappeared around the corner. She immediately pulled out a second phone, a prepaid device purchased yesterday, and began making arrangements that wouldn't appear on any account Daniel might monitor. Clara commandeered a secure conference room at her firm, spreading financial documents across the table. She told her assistant she was working on a high-profile fraud case, which wasn't entirely untrue. "You've been at this for hours," Marcus said, appearing in the doorway with coffee. "Must be serious." Clara gestured him inside, closing the door. After a moment's consideration, she decided to trust her colleague of 10 years. "I need your expertise, but this stays between us," she said. "I'm tracking sophisticated fund transfers through multiple shell companies." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Client case? Personal?" Clara displayed her findings on the monitor. "These transfers started 18 months ago, small amounts initially, growing progressively larger, always staying just below automatic notification thresholds." Marcus studied the screen. Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Singapore. Classic offshore routing. Whoever designed this knows how to evade detection. "That's what concerns me," Clara replied. "Look at the timing pattern." She highlighted a sequence of transactions. These align perfectly with Ethan's conference trips, but the destinations don't match his supposed locations. Marcus whistled softly. "Someone's been busy and clever." Clara switched to another screen showing account totals. "Nearly 2 million diverted over 18 months, but it's not just our personal accounts. There's evidence of corporate data being accessed during the same time frames." "Your firm's data?" Marcus asked, his expression darkening, "and possibly Ethan's hospital network. Patient information, research data, both would be valuable to competitors." Clara pulled up a final document, incorporation papers for an obscure holding company with Ethan listed as principal alongside an unfamiliar name, Olivia Hartwell. "The money trail leads here," Clara said quietly. "A company established 3 years ago, before most of the transfers began." 3 years? Marcus looked at her with concern. "But that's—" "Before our last anniversary," Clara confirmed, her voice steady despite the implication. "This isn't just about money. This is elaborate, long-term deception." Clara's phone chimed with Lila's distinctive tone as she entered her hotel room, a neutral space where neither Ethan nor his impersonator could find her. "Did you land safely?" Clara asked, setting her laptop on the desk. "Just touched down at JFK," Lila replied. "Clara, I've been thinking about you non-stop. What's happening?" "I'm still piecing it together," Clara said, keeping her voice measured. "But I need to ask you something. During your layover in Paris, could you—" "Already did," Lila interrupted. "I'm sending you photos now. I had a 6-hour layover and did some reconnaissance." Clara's phone pinged with incoming images. She put Lila on speaker and began scrolling through them, each one landing like a physical blow, despite her mental preparation. Ethan, the real Ethan, walking along the Seine with a striking blonde woman. Ethan kissing her outside a Parisian cafe. Ethan entering an elegant apartment building with his arm around her waist, looking more relaxed than Clara had seen him in years. "I followed them to that building," Lila explained, her voice gentle. "According to the doorman, they've had an apartment there for 2 years. He recognized Ethan immediately, called him Monsieur Reynolds, and asked about his research. Clara zoomed in on one image, showing the woman more clearly. Elegant, confident, probably mid-30s. Her expensive clothing and jewelry suggested significant wealth. "There's more," Lila said hesitantly. "I showed the doorman your photo and asked if he'd seen you before. He looked confused and said Ethan's wife was named Olivia." The name connected instantly to the incorporation papers. Clara's breath caught, but her mind continued cataloging facts methodically. "Clara? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Clara replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is exactly what I needed. Confirmation." "What are you going to do?" Lila asked. Clara studied the final photo, Ethan and Olivia laughing together, framed against the Eiffel Tower in the background. The image of perfect happiness built on elaborate lies and stolen money. "What I do best," Clara answered, closing the images and opening her financial analysis software. "Follow the paper trail to its source, then make sure everyone involved faces consequences for their actions." She paused, feeling a strange calm settle over her. "And Lila, thank you. Truth hurts, but it's always better than comfortable deception." Clara slid her security badge through the reader, anxiety rising as she entered the firm's most secure data center. She'd requested an urgent meeting with Kenneth Blackwood, head of corporate security, and Caroline Hayes, the managing partner. "Clara," Caroline greeted her, expression grave. "Ken says this is critical." "It is." Clara connected her laptop to the secure system. "I've discovered evidence suggesting a significant data breach targeting our most sensitive client information." Kenneth leaned forward. "How significant?" "Comprehensive." Clara displayed her findings on the wall monitor. "These access logs show systematic extraction of proprietary financial models, client data, and strategy documents over the past 18 months. Caroline paled. "How did you find this?" "I was investigating financial irregularities in my personal accounts when I discovered parallel patterns in our corporate systems." Clara omitted mentioning Ethan, focusing on the professional implications. "Someone established remote access points using legitimate credentials, then extracted data during off hours." Kenneth studied the screen. "These are executive-level access patterns." "Yes," Clara confirmed, her voice steady despite the implications. "Specifically, access using my credentials, but at times when I wasn't working." The realization dawned on Caroline's face. "You think someone used your login information?" "I know they did." Clara displayed a timeline correlation. "Every extraction occurred while I was verifiably elsewhere, mostly during evenings when I was at home with my husband." The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. Clara forced herself to say it aloud. "I believe my husband Ethan gained access to my credentials and has been systematically stealing corporate data to sell to competitors." She maintained professional composure as her career reputation imploded alongside her marriage. The financial trail leads to offshore accounts and a company he established with another woman. This wasn't opportunistic, it was planned. Kenneth's expression hardened. We need to notify the FBI immediately. Yes, Clara agreed. But first, we need to understand exactly what was compromised. The damage isn't just financial, it's reputational. She didn't add that the same applied to her life. Everything she'd built, her marriage, career, identity, was collapsing around her in a cascade of betrayal that started at home, but now threatened everything she'd worked for. Clara sat alone in her hotel room, surrounded by the evidence of her unraveling life. On her laptop screen, a collection of photographs and documents told a devastating story. Wedding invitation: Ethan Reynolds and Clara Bennett, June 18th, 12 years ago. Business incorporation papers: Hartwell Reynolds Consulting, formed 14 years ago by Olivia Hartwell and Ethan Reynolds. Clara stared at the timestamps until they blurred. 14 years, 2 years before he'd proposed to her. With trembling fingers, she opened another document. Property records for the Paris apartment, purchased 13 years ago, with both their names on the deed. 1 year before Clara had even met Ethan. She reached for their wedding album, the leather-bound pages now feeling like a prop from an elaborate theatrical production. And there was Ethan, smiling at her as she walked down the aisle, while apparently owning property with another woman. Clara searched her memory for signs she should have seen: the frequent European trips that predated their marriage, his reluctance to discuss certain parts of his past, the separate email accounts he'd always maintained for professional reasons. She flipped through photos from their early dating period: dinner at Antoine's, the weekend in Napa Valley, the medical conference where they'd first met. Had any of it been real? Or had she simply been a convenient cover, a respectable American wife to complement his other life? Clara returned to her laptop, pulling up financial records she'd assembled with brutal precision. The patterns told an unmistakable story. Ethan had maintained a double life for the entirety of their relationship. Her forensic accounting skills, so valuable in her professional life, now laid bare the architecture of her personal devastation. What kind of person could compartmentalize so completely? What kind of fool had she been to miss it? Clara, who prided herself on seeing patterns others missed, who could detect financial deception with a glance at a spreadsheet, had failed to see the elaborate deception in her own home. The wedding ring on her finger suddenly felt like evidence from a crime scene. She removed it, placing it beside the laptop as the final exhibit in the case against her judgment. Clara stood at the window of her hotel room, watching rain streak the glass as darkness fell. She'd switched off her phones, disconnected from the world that no longer made sense. The investigation at work would proceed without her. She'd been placed on administrative leave, pending a full security audit. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the city lights blur through the rain and her tears. For the first time since this nightmare began, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she'd lost. Not just a husband, but the belief that she knew what was real. Not just financial security, but professional credibility. Not just her marriage, but her very identity as someone who understood truth and deception. "Who am I?" she whispered to the empty room. "If everything I believed was a lie, then who have I been for 12 years? She turned back to the scattered evidence of her demolished life. Reports, photographs, financial statements, all perfectly organized, as if proper documentation could somehow contain the chaos of complete betrayal. Clara sank to the floor, her back against the bed, and did something she hadn't done since her father's funeral 20 years ago. She wept. Not the quiet, dignified tears of someone maintaining control, but the raw, body-shaking sobs of fundamental loss. How long she remained there, she couldn't say. Minutes or hours passed as the carefully constructed compartments of her emotional life finally collapsed. The professional detachment that had carried her through the investigation dissolved, leaving only the wounded human beneath. When the tears finally subsided, Clara remained on the floor, empty and hollowed out. The rain continued outside, a steady rhythm against the window. In the stillness that followed emotional surrender, her mind drifted, no longer forcing analytical thought, but allowing patterns to form without direction. Something about patterns, about deception, about the systematic nature of Ethan's betrayal. A strange thought surfaced through the emotional haze. Complex fraud schemes always left predictable vulnerabilities. It was why she could catch financial criminals, because no matter how clever the deception, patterns created weak points. Clara slowly raised her head, a tiny spark flickering in the darkness of her despair. If Ethan's betrayal followed patterns, and everything in her investigation suggested it did, then perhaps those same patterns could become her weapon. She reached for a tissue, wiped her eyes, and for the first time in days felt something besides pain, something that resembled purpose. The hotel room was quiet, except for the gentle tap of rain against the window and the soft click of Clara's keyboard. 3 a.m, and she sat cross-legged on the bed, surrounded by financial statements and transaction records she'd printed and organized into precise stacks. She'd been staring at the data for hours, seeking structure in the chaos of betrayal. The professional part of her brain had finally reactivated, analyzing Ethan's movements the way she would track a sophisticated financial criminal. Clara pinned financial transfers to a digital timeline, color-coding them against Ethan's travel schedule. Patterns slowly emerged from the noise. Regular transfers every third Friday, larger movements quarterly, specific accounts used for specific purposes. Predictable, she whispered, the first word she'd spoken aloud in hours. You're actually predictable, Ethan. She expanded her analysis, adding Daniel Reed's known movements and the communications she'd intercepted. The timeline grew more complex, but the underlying structure became clearer, a systematic operation with consistent rhythms. Clara created a visualization mapping the flow of money through various accounts. The diagram resembled a digital circulatory system with regular pulses and cycles. Despite the sophistication of the scheme, it followed consistent patterns. Ethan's precision working against him. A strange calm settled over her as professional focus replaced emotional turmoil. This was familiar territory, following financial breadcrumbs, identifying behavioral signatures, predicting future movements based on past patterns. She highlighted several upcoming dates where, based on the pattern, significant fund transfers would likely occur. If Ethan maintained his schedule, 3 major financial movements would happen within the next 2 weeks. The realization sparked something she hadn't felt since the nightmare began, a sense of control. Clara wasn't just a victim. She was perhaps the only person who could decode what Ethan had built. She smiled for the first time in days, a small, determined expression. Ethan had chosen the wrong person to deceive. He'd forgotten what she did for a living. What you're describing is essentially a financial tracking virus, said Trevor, his voice low, despite the privacy of his basement office. As the firm's senior digital forensics specialist, he'd helped Clara catch financial criminals for years. Clara nodded. Something that attaches to transactions flowing through these specific accounts, then reports back their destinations without being detected. Trevor leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his graying hair. It's possible, but risky. These offshore systems have sophisticated security. But they all have the same vulnerability, Clara replied, pointing to her diagram. They have to connect to legitimate financial networks eventually. That's our access point. Trevor studied her plan, professional curiosity overcoming his initial hesitation. You'd need to plant it at the exact moment a transfer occurs. Miss that window, and the whole operation fails. I've identified 3 upcoming transfer windows based on Ethan's patterns. Clara showed him the timeline. Here, and here. The most significant one is likely next Friday. Based on previous patterns, he'll move at least $500,000. Trevor whistled softly. Clara, I can't officially help you with this. The firm would— I'm not asking officially, she interrupted. I'm asking as someone who's helped you catch dozens of financial criminals. This is no different, except it's personal. He studied her for a long moment. What exactly do you want this virus to do? Track and trace, not destroy. I need to know where every dollar goes, map the entire network, and understand exactly who's involved. And then, she hesitated, I need to be able to freeze the assets when the time comes. Trevor's eyebrows shot up. That's beyond tracking. That's active intervention. Justice requires intervention, Clara said simply. He nodded slowly, then turned to his computer. I'll need to modify an existing forensic tool, something subtle enough to avoid detection but powerful enough to map the network. His fingers began moving across the keyboard. It would need to replicate alongside the funds without triggering security protocols. Clara watched as Trevor began building the framework, coding sequences appearing on his screen. What will you call it? He asked, without looking up. Clara considered the question. Phoenix, because something new will rise from these ashes. Trevor nodded, continuing to work. Phoenix it is. But Clara— He looked up, expression serious. Once you deploy this, there's no going back. I passed the point of no return when I discovered my husband's other wife, she replied. Now I'm just following the evidence to its conclusion. Clara sat in her rental car outside a nondescript office building, laptop open on the passenger seat. Friday, 2:17 p.m., exactly when Ethan's pattern suggested the next major transfer would occur. Connection established, Trevor's voice came through her earpiece. Ready when you are. They'd chosen this location for its proximity to the financial district's fiber optic hub, providing the fastest possible connection to the banking networks they needed to access. Beginning sequence now, Clara replied, fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced precision. The tracking program, Phoenix, was loaded and waiting for deployment. Trevor had explained the concept like a postal inspector marking a package with invisible ink, then following it through the system. Phoenix would attach itself to the financial transfer, then silently track every subsequent movement without altering anything. Transfer initiated, Trevor reported, monitoring the banking networks remotely. Ethan's account in Grand Cayman just sent $650,000 to the holding company in Singapore, exactly as you predicted. Clara took a deep breath and executed the deployment sequence. Lines of code scrolled across her screen as Phoenix activated, attaching itself to the transfer. Status? She asked, watching the progress bar inch forward. Tracking. Trevor's voice was tense. We've got connection. Phoenix is attaching to the transfer. Clara held her breath as security warnings flashed briefly on her screen, then subsided. We're in, Trevor confirmed. Phoenix is successfully embedded and tracking. It's following the money through. Wait, it's splitting. 3 separate destinations. Clara watched as her screen displayed a real-time map of the money flow, branching paths showing Ethan's network spreading across financial jurisdictions chosen specifically to avoid detection. "It's working," she whispered, as data began accumulating: account numbers, beneficial owners, transaction histories. Phoenix was mapping every connection, every hiding place Ethan had established. "Clara," Trevor's voice had an edge of amazement, "this is bigger than we thought. There are at least 12 separate entities involved, all interconnected." "Your husband built an impressive network." "Not impressive enough," Clara replied, watching as Phoenix completed its deployment. The program was now embedded throughout Ethan's financial system, invisible but gathering information with every transaction. "Now what?" Trevor asked. Clara closed her laptop, a sense of grim satisfaction replacing the helplessness of recent days. "Now we watch, we track, we gather evidence." She started the car. "And when the time is right, we freeze everything." For the first time since her world collapsed, Clara felt something resembling control. Ethan had spent years building his deception. She would dismantle it in days. Clara sat in Trevor's office, surrounded by multiple monitors displaying Phoenix's surveillance data. After a week tracking Ethan's network, they had mapped the complete financial ecosystem, 15 accounts across 9 jurisdictions, all flowing to and from Hartwell Reynolds Consulting. "It's time," Clara said, studying the transaction patterns. "The quarterly consolidation happens today. All the separate streams will converge before redistribution." Trevor nodded, fingers poised over his keyboard. "Once we execute, there's no hiding what we've done. Every account will lock simultaneously." "That's exactly what we want," Clara replied. "Complete containment with no warning." She opened her laptop, entering her authorization codes to activate Phoenix's containment protocols. Trevor had designed the system to require dual authentication. Neither could proceed alone, a safeguard against impulsive action. "Initiating lockdown sequence," Trevor said, beginning the process. "Financial authorities in each jurisdiction have received our evidence package and are standing by." Clara watched as the system began executing precisely timed commands across multiple financial platforms. Each command appeared on screen momentarily before confirmation signals returned. "Cayman Islands account secured," Trevor reported, Singapore responding, Switzerland confirmed. Clara monitored the flow diagrams as one by one the pathways closed, years of meticulously constructed financial architecture frozen in place by algorithms she had helped design. "Paris account locked," Trevor continued. "That's where most of the property assets are held." Clara felt a curious detachment watching Ethan's financial empire being systematically contained. Not satisfaction or triumph, just the calm certainty of justice proceeding as it should. "Confirmation received from all jurisdictions," Trevor announced finally. "Complete lockdown achieved. All assets frozen pending investigation." Clara nodded, closing her laptop. $2,300,000 secured, plus property assets worth another $3 million. "What happens to it all?" Trevor asked. "That's for the courts to decide," Clara replied. "I don't want his money. I just want him held accountable." She stood, gathering her things with the precise movements of someone completing one phase before beginning another. The financial containment was accomplished. Now came the human element. Clara returned home to find Daniel in the kitchen, making coffee with attention evident in his movements. She'd been avoiding the house, using work as an excuse, but new confrontation was inevitable. "Welcome home, stranger," he said, his attempt at casual falling flat. "Busy week at the office?" "Very," Clara replied, setting her bag on the counter. "Financial audit season." Daniel watched her carefully, Ethan's mannerisms perfectly reproduced, but with an underlying wariness that hadn't been there before. "You've been distant lately." "Have I?" Clara met his gaze directly. "I suppose I've had a lot on my mind." "Anything you want to talk about?" He offered her coffee with a studied casualness. Clara accepted the cup, noticing how he monitored her reaction. "Actually, there is something. I've been thinking about taking a trip." A flicker of alarm crossed his features. "What kind of trip?" "Paris," she said simply, watching his expression. "I've always wanted to see the apartment." The cup in Daniel's hand stilled midair. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. "What apartment would that be?" "The one on Avenue Montaigne," Clara replied calmly, "with the view of the Eiffel Tower." Silence stretched between them. Daniel set his cup down carefully. "Who are you?" Clara asked quietly. He hesitated, calculation visible behind his eyes. "I'm your husband." "No," Clara said. "You're Daniel Reed, an actor hired to impersonate my husband while he's in Paris with his other partner. The question is whether you're willing to continue this charade now that all the accounts have been frozen." Daniel's practiced poise faltered. "What do you mean frozen?" "Every account in Ethan's network was locked this morning," Clara explained. "Including the one that pays you, I imagine." She watched the realization dawn on his face. "You're very good, by the way," she added. "The mannerisms, the speech patterns, it's impressive work." Daniel stared at her, then sighed, his posture subtly shifting as he dropped the performance. "How long have you known?" "Since my sister saw Ethan boarding a flight to Paris when you were supposedly here," Clara replied. "What I still don't understand is why you agreed to do this." "It started as a job," Daniel said, his natural voice slightly deeper than Ethan's. "Act as a stand-in during business trips. It became more complicated." "And the corporate espionage, was that part of your job description?" Daniel's expression revealed genuine surprise. "I was never told about that." "I was just supposed to maintain the home situation while he was away." Clara studied him, weighing his sincerity. "Ethan will be returning soon, expecting everything to be normal. What will you tell him?" Daniel looked at her with new respect. "What do you want me to tell him?" "Mrs. Reynolds, we appreciate your cooperation in this matter," said Agent Brennan, sliding a folder across the conference table. "The evidence you've provided gives us sufficient cause to proceed with both domestic and international charges." Clara sat in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division office, surrounded by federal agents and representatives from international law enforcement. The room's formal atmosphere was punctuated by the quiet efficiency of people accustomed to building cases against sophisticated criminals. "The asset freeze was executed perfectly," added Interpol liaison Marchot. "We've secured cooperation from authorities in all relevant jurisdictions." "What about the corporate espionage angle?" Clara asked. "That's where we need your continued assistance," Brennan replied. "Your firm's proprietary information appears to have been sold to multiple competitors. We'll need detailed inventories of what was compromised." Clara nodded. "I've prepared preliminary documentation. My firm's security team is conducting a comprehensive audit." Agent Delgado, who had been quietly reviewing files, looked up. "Dr. Reynolds is scheduled to return to the States next Tuesday. Our surveillance confirms he's booked on Air France Flight 382 from Paris." "And he has no idea his accounts are frozen?" Marchot asked. "None," Clara confirmed. The financial institutions are maintaining standard automated responses. As far as he knows, everything is proceeding normally. Brennan leaned forward. We're prepared to take him into custody upon arrival, but there's an alternative approach worth considering. If he returns home believing everything is normal, we might gather additional evidence about his contacts and co-conspirators. Clara considered this. You want Daniel Reed to continue his impersonation while you monitor Ethan's communications. Precisely, Brennan confirmed. Mr. Reed has agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Clara felt a moment of surprise at Daniel's decision, then nodded. How long would this phase last? No more than 48 hours, Delgado assured her. Just long enough to identify any remaining connections we've missed. Clara looked around the table at the assembled team, professionals working within the system to deliver justice. There was something profoundly reassuring about the process unfolding according to established protocols. I'll help however I can, she said finally. But I have one condition. What's that? Brennan asked. When you arrest him, Clara said, meeting his gaze steadily, I want to be there, not for revenge, but because after living with a performance for so long, I need to see the moment the curtain finally falls. Brennan studied her, then nodded. We can arrange that. As the meeting concluded, Clara felt a growing certainty. The trap was set, the authorities were in place, and Ethan was flying home to a reality very different from the one he had engineered. Ethan Reynolds was halfway to the private airfield when the notification appeared on his phone. Account access denied. He tried another banking app. Same message. Faster, he ordered his driver, the first tremors of alarm registering as he methodically attempted to access each of his accounts. All locked. At the airfield, he strode toward the waiting jet, carry-on gripped tightly in one hand, phone pressed to his ear with the other. I don't care what security protocol is triggered, he snapped to the banking representative. Override it. I need access immediately. Behind him, a sleek black sedan pulled through the airfield gates, then another. Olivia emerged from the jet's cabin, elegant as always, but with tension evident in her posture. Ethan, what's happening? He ended the call, scanning the surroundings with growing urgency. We need to leave now. Something's wrong with our accounts. As they turned toward the aircraft steps, 2 more vehicles entered the airfield, blocking the runway. Dr. Reynolds, called a voice through a megaphone. This is Interpol. The aircraft is grounded. Please remain where you are. Ethan froze momentarily, then grabbed Olivia's arm. This way, he hissed, pulling her toward a maintenance hangar. Agents emerged from the vehicles, moving with coordinated precision. Among them, Clara spotted her husband's familiar profile, now taut with desperation as he dragged Olivia between parked aircraft. All units, commanded the Interpol officer beside Clara. Suspects attempting to flee toward East Hangar. Ethan's carefully constructed escape dissolving around him, he abandoned his carry-on, reaching instead for his satellite phone, the emergency backup unconnected to his known communications. As they reached the hangar doorway, Olivia jerked free. "What have you done?" she demanded, fear breaking through her composed facade. "Nothing they can prove if we leave now," Ethan insisted, punching numbers into the phone. The call connected just as floodlights illuminated the hangar entrance. "We need extraction," Ethan said urgently. "Protocol 7. The voice that responded wasn't his emergency contact. "I'm afraid Protocol 7 has been suspended, Dr. Reynolds," said Agent Brennan. "Along with all your other contingency plans." Ethan stared at the phone, then at the agents surrounding the hangar, the full scope of his predicament finally registering. Whatever escape he'd planned, Clara and her allies had anticipated it perfectly. Clara stood beside Agent Marchot as Ethan and Olivia were escorted from the hangar, their expressions a study in contrasts. Olivia's shocked disbelief, Ethan's cold calculation even in defeat. "Ethan Reynolds," announced the Interpol agent, "you are under arrest for financial fraud, identity theft, corporate espionage, and multiple violations of international banking regulations." Clara watched her husband's face, searching for some hint of the man she thought she'd married. He looked older in the harsh floodlights, the distinguished confidence she'd once admired now revealing itself as mere arrogance. When Ethan spotted her among the authorities, his expression flickered with genuine surprise. "Clara," he said, voice modulated to the gentle tone he'd always used with her, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Clara replied evenly. "Just patterns, financial patterns, behavioral patterns, deception patterns. You're quite systematic, Ethan. It made you predictable." His mask slipped, revealing a flash of anger. "You couldn't possibly understand the complexity of—" "I've mapped your entire network," Clara interrupted. 15 accounts across 9 jurisdictions, the quarterly consolidation, the property holdings, the corporate data theft, all of it." Olivia turned to Ethan, stunned. "You said she knew about us. You never mentioned criminal charges." "She didn't know anything," Ethan snapped, facade crumbling. "She was never supposed to know." "And that was your fundamental mistake," Clara said quietly, "underestimating me." As officers led them toward separate vehicles, Ethan made one last attempt. "Clara, whatever they're paying you to cooperate, I can double it. We can still fix this." Clara shook her head, a strange peace settling over her. "I'm not being paid, Ethan. This isn't about money. It's about truth." She watched as he was placed in the police vehicle, his carefully constructed world of deception collapsing completely. The man who had juggled 2 lives, 2 women, and multiple criminal enterprises for years was now reduced to a single, inescapable reality. "Are you all right, Mrs. Reynolds?" Agent Marchot asked gently. "Yes," Clara said, surprised to find it was true. "Actually, I am." As the vehicles pulled away, Clara stood in the cool Parisian evening, feeling neither triumph nor despair, just the clean certainty of truth finally revealed and justice properly served. 1 week later, Clara sat across from Daniel Reed in a conference room at the FBI's New York office. Between them lay stacks of financial documents and transcripts from Ethan's ongoing interrogations. "Your testimony was extremely helpful," Agent Brennan told Daniel. "The detailed records you kept of your assignments will make the prosecution's case much stronger." Daniel nodded, glancing uncertainly at Clara. Without Ethan's mannerisms, he seemed younger, less confident. "I never knew about the corporate espionage or the extent of the financial fraud. I was told I was covering for a man who needed to maintain 2 separate lives for personal reasons. Yet you continued even after you suspected it wasn't just personal," Clara observed. Daniel met her gaze directly. "Yes, I did. The money was good, and I told myself it wasn't my business." He paused. "I was wrong." The simple admission surprised Clara. After months of deception, the straightforward acknowledgement felt refreshingly honest. Brennan gathered his files. "I'll give you 2 a moment before the final paperwork." When they were alone, Daniel spoke quietly. "I know it doesn't mean much now, but I am sorry. Not just because I got caught." Clara studied him. "You're a good actor. How do I know this isn't just another performance?" "You don't," he admitted. "But cooperating with the investigation gets me reduced charges, not immunity. I'm still facing consequences. Clara considered this. What will you do after? Legitimate acting, I hope, he said with a hint of irony, though my most convincing role probably won't make my portfolio. Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling slightly. You were convincing, just not quite perfect. What gave me away? He asked, professional curiosity evident. Small things, the way you held a coffee cup, how you pronounced certain words. She paused. But mostly, it was patterns. Once I knew to look, the inconsistencies became clear. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. The same skills that helped you uncover Ethan's financial fraud. Exactly. Clara gathered her belongings, a new idea taking shape. You know, there are probably other women out there, women whose husbands have created elaborate deceptions they can't quite identify. Probably, Daniel agreed. People who suspect something's wrong but can't prove it. They need someone who understands these patterns, Clara said, the concept crystallizing as she spoke. Someone who can help them find the truth, whatever it might be. Daniel studied her. Someone like you. Clara nodded, feeling the first stirrings of genuine purpose. My firm has placed me on extended leave. I have time to consider new directions. As they left the conference room, Clara felt oddly grateful to the man who had impersonated her husband. His deception had been part of Ethan's scheme, yet their conversation had unexpectedly illuminated her path forward. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed her might now become the foundation for helping others, not through vengeance, but through understanding the intricate patterns of deception, and teaching others to recognize them before they lost everything, as she nearly had. For the first time since this ordeal began, Clara looked toward the future with something resembling hope. 6 months after Ethan's arrest, Clara unlocked the door to her new office suite. The polished sign beside the entrance read, Pattern Recognition Consulting, Revealing Hidden Truths. Sunlight streamed through recently installed windows, illuminating a space designed to feel both professional and comforting. As she arranged files on her desk, Clara reflected on the journey that had led her here. The forensic accounting skills that had once helped corporations uncover fraud now served individuals suspecting elaborate deceptions in their personal lives. The patterns were often similar, small inconsistencies that, when properly analyzed, revealed larger truths. Her first client arrived precisely on time, a woman in her 50s whose nervous determination reminded Clara of herself from not so long ago. I don't know if I'm imagining things, the woman began, twisting her wedding ring. My husband's explanations make sense individually, but together something feels wrong. Clara nodded, recognizing the familiar doubt in the woman's voice. That's often how it starts, not with obvious lies, but with explanations that require increasingly complex justifications. Friends think I'm paranoid, the woman admitted. Maybe I am. Or maybe you're recognizing patterns others can't see, Clara replied. Either way, you deserve clarity. Truth is always better than uncertainty, whatever that truth might be. They spent the next hour mapping inconsistencies and establishing a framework for investigation. Clara never promised specific outcomes, only the pursuit of truth, wherever it led. After her client left, Clara stood by the window, watching the city below. Ethan's trial was ongoing, his elaborate fraud scheme dismantled piece by piece. The pain he'd caused would always be part of her story, but no longer defined her future. Lila had asked once if Clara regretted discovering the truth. She'd considered the question carefully before answering. Living authentically in pain is still better than living comfortably in illusion. That philosophy now guided her work, helping others find their way from deception to truth, from bewilderment to clarity. Not every case involved criminal activity like Ethan's, but each represented someone seeking alignment between appearance and reality. Clara turned back to her desk, where photographs of new clients waited. Their stories were different, but the patterns of deception remained surprisingly consistent. And in recognizing those patterns, she had found not just healing, but purpose,